Hello, everyone, and welcome to the lecture for Module 4, Legal Issues. In this lecture, we'll be talking about the Controlled Substances Act of 1970, the various drug schedules that were created as a result of that act, and a little bit about the legal concerns about the possession of controlled substances or drugs. So the Controlled Substances Act is currently the law of the land in the United States in terms of our policy towards drugs. Um, there are three different ways that a government system could approach drugs. One is prohibition, so just outright banning it. Another is regulation, having some laws or rules around its possession and distribution, or a laissez-faire attitude, which would be just fair game, government doesn't care, do what you wanna kind of attitude towards drugs. Um, in 1970, the Controlled Substances Act of the US created a regulation policy towards drugs in the US. So it created these schedules used to make rules about how drugs are possessed and distributed here. And so this act organized drugs based on the medical use of the drug, the potential for abuse of the drug, the safety, and the tendency or liability of developing dependence or addiction. And this Controlled Substances Act is a law that was passed, and it created the DEA, which is the government group in charge of the schedules. So that's the Drug Enforcement Administration. So I'm going to run through the various schedules and highlight sort of the differences between them. Schedule 1 drugs, and these are going in order of most restricted to least restricted drug. So Schedule 1 drugs are the most restricted drugs. They're drugs that have a high potential for abuse with no current medical use. And there's a lack of accepted safety related to that drug. Examples in this category are heroin, GHB or roofies, and LSD, and then also marijuana. At the federal level, marijuana is classified as a Schedule 1 drug, along with heroin and LSD and roofies. Schedule 1, like I said, is the most restricted, so it means that only researchers can possess these substances for research purposes. So they cannot just have these drugs on them all the time, but they can apply to get access to these drugs for research purposes. So my lecture question to you today is actually about marijuana's classification as Schedule 1. So we haven't talked about marijuana yet in the course. We'll have a whole lesson on it. But as of right now, what are your thoughts or your opinions about why marijuana is a Schedule 1 drug and whether or not it should stay there according to what it is that you've heard about the substance either on the news or if you lived in a state where it had a medical we live in Maryland. Maryland has medical marijuana is legal here. So that's the lecture question. Should marijuana stay as Schedule 1 drug? Schedule 2 drugs are still drugs that have a high potential for abuse. So they're the same as Schedule 1 in terms of a high potential for abuse. But the difference is Schedule 2 drugs do have a currently accepted medical use. They also, though, in this schedule, again, going from most to least severe, these drugs in Schedule 2 may lead to severe dependence, either psychological or physical dependence. So most opioids count in this, like Oxycontin, morphine, PCP, cocaine, methadone, fentanyl, methamphetamine, all of these are Schedule 2 drugs. So again, the high potential for abuse may develop severe dependence, but there is at least some situations where the drug can be used medically. Schedule 3 drugs, now we're starting to get to lessening some of the restrictions. So these substances substances have less potential for abuse than Schedule 1 or 2. They have a currently accepted medical use. And the remaining schedules, those two facts will be true, that there's an accepted medical use and that they have less potential for abuse than the schedules before. And then where this starts to vary is in the risk for dependence. So for Schedule 3, these substances may lead to moderate or low physical dependence or high psychological dependence. So they're not creating a very strong physical dependence. They can maybe create a strong psychological dependence. Steroids, codeine with aspirin or Tylenol, ketamine, all fall into Schedule 3 drugs. Schedule 4 drugs, again, that low potential for abuse, currently accepted medical use. And then here, there's a limited risk of developing psychological or physical dependence. And so Xanax, some diazepines like Valium and clozapam, these are drugs that fall into Schedule 4. And then lastly, Schedule 5, the least regulated group. These substances have a low potential for abuse. They're currently accepted in the medical community, and there's a limited risk for developing dependence. So, for example, cough medicines with codeine in them would be Schedule 5. And so these schedules, again, regulate the possession and distribution of these drugs. And if you are in possession of a substance that is a controlled substance, it falls in the schedule system under this act from 1970, then there's a legal liability for that possession. And so if you are caught, it is up to the prosecutor to bring charges, and those charges vary widely across the country. They vary within a state by the jurisdiction. So, and there's so many factors that go into that, but you might be looking at more severe and harsher penalties in a place like Western Maryland than you may in some place like Baltimore City, sort of depending on the culture of the prosecutors, as well as the laws that are on the books, not to mention the state laws and then the federal laws. So there's at least 3 levels of legality that is being negotiated when drug charges are brought. But primarily the main determining factor in what type of charge is brought is the schedule of the drug and how much is in the person's possession. So the type of charges can fall into 2 categories: a felony charge or a misdemeanor charge. And a felony is a major, major criminal charge. It's very serious. It carries greater than a year of prison time, and it also results in a greater loss of rights and liberties even after the sentence has been completed. So there's a box on employment forms about whether or not you've ever been convicted of a felony, and employers have the ability to not hire you. You lose your right to vote in federal elections, statewide. It depends on the state. So there's some serious consequences that result from a felony conviction, aside from just straight up going to prison. And then there's the misdemeanors. So this is a more minor charge. Generally, it comes with some sort of fine, community service, or less than 1 year prison stay, sometimes all 3. And that would be generally, it's more the prosecutors, what counts as a misdemeanor varies, but if it's a large amount of drugs in a person's possession, it's almost certainly going to be a felony. And the tricky part here is that they can then add additional charges based on the amount in someone's possession related to distribution. So the law will just assume that if there's a certain amount that a person is possessing, that's not just for them to use, but that they intended to distribute it. And so that then can add on additional charges as well. In addition to the straight up illegal drugs that are Schedule 1 drugs, a lot of the other drugs in the Controlled Substances Act, people can have prescriptions for. However, it is illegal to have the drug in your possession if you don't have a prescription for it. So taking someone else's medication or getting sharing your medication or getting medication from others. That is illegal, and it could carry with it legal consequences, a la misdemeanor or a felony charge. There's also like a legitimate safety concern in sharing prescriptions. So prescription medicines are often tailored to the individual. They're prescribed by a doctor, taking into consideration the other prescriptions that person has, their age, weight, health, etc. And so if you cross prescriptions without taking those things into consideration, it could be dangerous. Um, and then a further complexity, as I mentioned and alluded to earlier, the state laws may be different from federal law. So marijuana is legal recreationally in a couple of states. It's legal for medical reasons and even more, but it's still illegal at the federal level. And so in the US, the federal law trumps state law. If it's being enforced. And so then enforcement of laws becomes kind of confusing and arbitrary when there's this discrepancy between the states and the federal government. So under the Trump administration, they were prosecuting federal marijuana laws to a greater degree than they were under the Obama administration. And so, you know, these things also change quickly and without notice. And so you can look up the laws and feel protected sort of in 1 month, and then the next month there's something that changed administratively at the state or federal level that would make enforcement um, either come down harder or be more lenient. So it's really hard to predict. And when you're engaged in illegal drugs or in possession of illegal drugs, that risk is really variable and really hard to calculate. And that's it for legal issues. And your next up is your exam.